Welcome back, Breakaway Wealth. I'm your host, Jim Oliver, and with me today, my co-host today is Bob Burnett. Welcome back, Bob.
Hey, Jim, good to be here. A lot going on in the world. So
there is a lot going on. And, I always, as a lot of listeners know, Bob and I are business partners in a lot of ventures. And I like that we balance each other out. And so Bob is very, he's got the numbers, he's got the stats, he's very engineer. He looks at the world like that. And that's really cool because I think what we're going to talk about today, you need to know the facts and you need to know the numbers and what's going to happen with these facts. But Bob, for just maybe somebody that hasn't listened to one of your other episodes, kind of give the listeners really quickly your background. Bob and I both live here in Southwest Florida, but Bob has a great background in his professional life. So just maybe give everybody a refresher on that, Bob.
Sure. So my background, I would say, first and foremost, I'm a technologist. I've spent most of my career around technology. Those of you who are a little longer in the tooth, like Jim and I, might remember a computer company called Gateway, which was the cow-spotted personal computer company. And I served as chief technology officer there, meaning that I ran the product development area. And I've also had a passion for economics. I do have a minor degree in economics, and I've studied that kind of in parallel over that period of time. And the last 5 years, a lot of my time and attention has gone to the cryptocurrency areas, specifically in trying to develop a deep understanding and now evangelizing of the importance of Bitcoin to the world. And I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit here today.
Absolutely. And Bob, I think it's important because, you were in technology about the time that the internet was really getting some traction, and you kind of rode that, that wave, so to speak. And I think that the blockchain and Bitcoin and the problem that Bitcoin solves, it's, I've heard you speak a million times, and where you've said the blockchain will be bigger than the internet. That's a big statement, but when we think about that, really Bitcoin is gonna be the currency of the future, right? And so how big is that? Well, it's really big, but we have to figure out if we know Bitcoin's a solution to what? We got to know what the problem is, right? And Nelson started his great book, Becoming Your Own Banker, with the problem first. So touch on that, kind of give us a, genesis of the problem and where we are today on the problem.
Yeah, it's great actually that you bring that up, Jim, because as many of you may know, Jim and I are close friends, and I reached out to Jim actually earlier today and said, hey, we've been meaning to do this podcast. Let's do it today. And there's a couple of reasons why. One of them was I was catching up myself on some of the Create Tailwind podcasts from the past. And on one of them, Jim was talking with one of the other guests about this very topic of Nelson's. Jim was talking about his difficulties getting through the Old Testament, and his conversation with Nelson about, hey, if you have to read the Old Testament, you have to understand the Old Testament because that's the problem, and the New Testament is a solution. And it's exactly the trigger, for me reaching out to Jim, or as part of the trigger. The other thing Nelson said is, if you know what's happening, you'll know what to do. Two great pearls of wisdom that I think are very applicable today. There's actually two world events that also precipitated my discussion. The first one was yesterday, Russia announced that they were recognizing Bitcoin as a currency, and they would treat it exactly like a foreign currency. That may have been the type of thing that to the average person went kind of just as that's an interesting thing, but we'll probably touch on a little later the massive implications of a country like Russia saying this is a currency now. It's massive. The second thing was an announcement from the Fed today that CPI was at 7.5% year over year. And one of the things I want to start with here is CPI, Consumer Price Index, is not inflation. They're often used synonymously, but they are not the same thing. Real inflation, when you include assets, when you include the normal basket of things that affect people's life, is closer to 15 now. And in fact, if you use the same index of CPI was used in 1980, it would be about 15. So, but this whole thing, Jim, of kind of getting to the problem, we talk all the time with business owners. Almost everybody we talk to, the core topic is financial independence, and that revolves around money. But what I find, and I do a lot of public speaking, is almost nobody understands money. What is money? How does it work? And so I think that's a good place to start. What is money? So money is a representation of work. If you really sit down and you boil it down, you have money, and it is a result of your lifetime of work. Okay. And what is work? As Jim said, I'm an engineer. There's actually a physics definition of work, and it boils down to energy. Work is a measurement of energy. When you hear terms like horsepower, it's a measurement of energy. Well, so money is a representation of energy. A monetary network is a system by which that energy gets moved, and it gets moved through space and time. So if I have $20 today, I can move it through space. I can drive over to Target and I can spend it. I can also hold it, and I can spend it in the future. I can give it to my grandchildren for the future. If it loses some of its energy, some of its purchasing power, where does that energy go? What's causing that loss? Well, primarily, those things are things like inflation and taxes and fees. Those are the things that cause energy loss. So when you look at money, I think one of the most important things to sometimes do, whether you're evaluating your business, whether you're evaluating whether to invest in a certain asset, you have to think about what sits behind that. How will it move through space and time? What factors might impact it through space and time? And generally, in a short window of time, those things don't change much. But over a long period of time, those things can change dramatically. And I say that, by the way, from the perspective of the first world. Because if you're in a first world economy, like we happen to live in, and most of you listeners are, you're in a first world economy where those things don't change a lot. But if you live in a different area of the world, if you live in Argentina or Lebanon or Turkey or a place like that today, you look at it completely differently, because those things are not very constant. They do move and change in short windows of time. So I think, Jim, before we dive maybe on a little different tangent here, I think one of the things that we maybe want to talk to folks about here are, who's giving us like some of these numbers, who's giving us some of these measurements, what are their motivations? Because, we talk a lot about seceding from the financial system, and, what does that mean? And there are a lot of messages trying to get us to move our work, our energy, our money into that system. And I not that I don't think either of us are I told you so, we're trying to not beat our own horn, but we've been not only through this podcast for a couple of years, but we've been even on national broadcasts like the things we do with Ben Swan for several years, even pre-COVID, telling people things were going to change, that they're just over the horizon. And we're staring at it now. We're staring at, this real inflation at 15%, at 7.5% CPI, and it's essentially upon us, right? And so now I think it's a great time to start examining what to do. What does it mean? Maybe reevaluating all of the positions that you are in and ask, are these really the places I want to be going forward? A financial advisor or wealth advisor might say, do we need to rebalance the portfolio? Before I go into that, Jim, anything you want to?
No, it's interesting because you brought up a couple of things, Bob. I mean, one thing that we noticed as we did more and more things with Ben Swan is the more that we were direct, and maybe we almost thought maybe like, was that too aggressive? Or we're talking about slavery, we're talking about all these things, right? Being a financial slave. And we thought, should we not be as bold? And I think that what we discovered was that we need to be bold. And the more bold we are, it helps people because it motivates a response or action. Yeah. And when we talk about monetary debasement and what's happening right now, again, you used a great quote from Nelson: if you know what's happening, you'll know what to do. We really have to look at throughout history. There's a lot of things that brought down the Roman Empire, but in reality, it was the same things that are happening now to our government, to our country, and it probably will be the downfall of this country. Okay. And when's that going to happen? I'm not going to predict that. Will there be a better country coming out of the other side? Yeah, I think there will be. And I think it's okay. And I don't know if with you and I being in what I'll call our mid 50s, which are slowly becoming our late 50s. Will we be around to see it? I don't know. But I would just encourage the audience that this is sometimes, I don't want to say complicated, but it's something that you've not been told before. So it means that it's harder to understand because your brain wants to go back to the default that you were taught. Yeah. And you were taught that your pursuit of the dollar is what your life should be based on, because money equals choice equals freedom. Yeah. We're not debating that. Right. But if the value of that money is going down every single day, and if a 2020 dollar is worth 30% more than a 2022 dollar, or another way of saying that, if a 2022 dollar is worth 30% less than it was 2 years ago, we're on that slippery slope.
Right. Yeah. And here is maybe where we'll get into something a little more radical. Questions that I think each person has to ask themselves. Is the dollar the right way for me to be measuring my wealth? If we live in a world with, let's say, even 1% inflation, and you're examining an investment over a 5 or 10 year period, you might say, okay, that's not a terrible way to evaluate it. And the resistance, I talked about the resistance in the system, is maybe not so great. But what if the resistance is 15% over a 10-year period? If you're using the dollar, then at a minimum, you better be looking at the dollar in its purchasing power over these different periods of time, not not in absolute terms, right? That and I speak with a lot of investors, and a lot of them in the cryptocurrency world. And what I'll tell you is as Jim knows, we've raised several $1 million for our cryptocurrency working for our cryptocurrency ventures in the last 6 months, in the last year, several $1 million. There's a lot of people that passed on those opportunities, and I guess only time will tell whether they were wise to pass or not. But I'll tell you, there's a common theme of the people who passed, and that's people who got stuck into things like IRR, internal rate of return, return on invested capital. The people that did do the investments used completely different metrics about how they were going to the reasoning behind their investment and what they were expecting to get out of it. They had switched their mindset to measuring the investment in Bitcoin. And so they were investing dollars, but getting back Bitcoin. And they weren't trying to then re-look at the investment if they were looking at a 2-year, a 4-year, a 5-year horizon and saying, well, what was it in dollars? They had suspended, for the large part, those investors had suspended it. One of the things I've done, I mentioned I do a lot of speaking, is I have a chart that I bring up sometimes. And I'll bring it up in 2 ways. The first is I'll show a chart of the S&P 500 over the last 5 years. Yeah. And you guys can just imagine it. And it just kind of goes, of course, it's like any curve like that. It bounces a little bit, but it's basically starts in the lower left and it goes up to the upper right, and it looks like a meteor. Okay. And usually when I'm talking to people, I ask how many people have participated, and the hands go up, and a lot of people are very proud of how they've done in the market. And then I say, let me show you the exact same chart, but I'm going to change the basis from dollars to Bitcoin. And the chart goes from the upper left to the lower right. In other words, it's negative. Okay. And because the first chart, Jim talked about debasement. The first chart is loaded with debasement. The input dollars in the lower left are completely different dollars than the dollars in the upper right. But when you bring a constant in, because Bitcoin has a fixed supply, it looks completely differently. So I think it's important to think about that, regardless of what you're investing in. And, we have a lot of people. I'm not saying that they're doing bad things. I'm not discouraging them from any particular investment. But I think it's very important that you evaluate what you do, where your money is, what your expectations are for that money, what your exit strategy is, what factors might make you change that. Because the world is changing very quickly. Jim talked about Bitcoin potentially being the global reserve currency. I brought up the piece about Russia for a very specific reason. It's very clear that what Russia is trying to do, and we're not making political statements here about what's right or wrong, but they're a sovereign country with the right to do what they want. It's very clear that Russia is on the edge of saying, we no longer want dollars. One of the world's largest economies is saying, we don't want dollars. They've already said, a week before doing that, they said they will now trade, all their trades for petroleum will be in euros. They were already suspending from the US. Then they said on that, oh, and now we're going to accept Bitcoin too. There are big pieces of the world that would prefer not to work in dollars anymore. And the opportunity for that to happen is now there. I'm gonna also bring up what may be even the most important thing in this whole discussion, and that's that. And I'm bringing up something for those of you who are listening only. There's a visual here that you may want to go up and find on this presentation. It's about property rights. And so this is a big one. We have lots of people who have lots of money in gold and real estate and oil and equities in the US. And if you think about real estate as an example, and you think about the value at any point in time of that asset, let's say it's a piece of agricultural land in Iowa, and it has a value of 10,000. What probably very few people do is think back and say, well, how much of that value is because of the utility of the land, and how much of it is because it is one of the safest places in the world to store value. Well, there's a store of value component and a utility component. Now, a way to approximate that is to look at a similar piece of land in a country that's less stable. So if you go to, for instance, the Eastern Ukraine right now, a less politically stable place, but with similar agricultural land, you might find that an acre of land is about $500. So what that tells us in crude terms is that the $10,000 piece of land in Iowa is 5% the utility of the land and 95% because that land happens to be in a place where the rule of law and the enforcement of the property rights is highly appealing. For instance, again, we're talking real estate here today. A massive piece of the United States real estate market is not only US investors bringing money into the US to store their value there, but internationally, it's been one of the safest places for people to be. And this system that we have has been the greatest system in history, without question. We have the rule of law here, the enforcement capability of that law, the will to do it and the ability to do it, both the police and the military state. And I'll tell you something a little strange about it, though, too, is this property rights system is essentially paid for in blood. Our military, when we talk about what our veterans have done, we've paid for this system in blood. So I like to say, the historical version of property rights protection is a rule of law enforced by physical power and paid for in blood. And here in the Western world, it's been by far the superior method. It's expensive, by the way. It creates a lot of resistance. We talked about energy. There's a lot of resistance in the system to create these secure property rights. What's happening right now is Bitcoin and the blockchain, which Jim talked about, which is an area of passion for me, has completely changed that. Okay, we now have the ability to protect property rights for an asset through a protocol enforced by a network, which is the miners that Jim and I have invested in heavily, and it's paid for in energy. There's no blood lost. There's no people being shot. There's no people being imprisoned. And so the question becomes, as people have the ability to store their value in a system that is easier to enforce, cheaper to enforce, and actually more secure, what happens to the asset values of those things like real estate, like gold, like oil, where store of value has been a big piece of the asset valuation? This is a pretty radical concept, but it's one that I think it's important to start talking about, not as something that will change next Tuesday, but that as we look at what will happen over the next handful of years could be radical. That if you are, as an example, if you are a person in Argentina, you're a successful business person in Argentina, and you come across, let's say, $1 million, historically, what you would do is you would get on an airplane and you'd fly to Miami and you'd find a condo or a strip mall or something like that, and you would pump your money in there, and that's where you would store your value. What if you don't have to get on the airplane? What if all you have to do is click a button and you own Bitcoin, and it's completely secure? The government can't take it away from you. You can move that money even better because it's more liquid than that real estate is, right? I can sell it and I can move it and transport it through space and time with no resistance. These are pretty radical things. And so, as I'll just say it from my personal perspective, I see myself investing on a percentage basis significantly less in assets that use the traditional method of property rights enforcement, and a lot more in investments or assets that have this new, more efficient, supreme way of enforcing property rights.
Yeah. Bob, yeah, kind of where do I start there? You just gave a lot of information. So, when I think about the knowledge that you've created, and I tell this story a lot on here, and you maybe heard it, but and maybe you recall this conversation, but in 2017, at the end of maybe the third or fourth quarter of 2017, you said, Jim, what do you know about cryptocurrency? And I said, you mean Bitcoin? And you said, no, there's other types of cryptocurrency. And I said, no, Bob, I only know the word Bitcoin. That's all I know. Right. And we've come a long way since then, and especially you. Right. But it makes me think of a verse in the Bible, and it says, every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool displays folly. Right. That's Proverbs 13:16. So we have to educate ourselves about what is happening, about the problem that Bitcoin solves. And by the way, we're not telling you to go out and buy Bitcoin. We don't recommend you buy anything on this show. Okay. We're just giving you information. Do with it what you want. Okay. But you really have to understand the differences, and you have to understand, as much as you may or may not want to understand, that governments are corrupt when it comes to monetary policy. And that there is a great book called The Law by Frederick Bastiat. I can never say it. I think that might be actually pretty close. And he says that there's plunder, illegal plunder, and then there's legal plunder, right? Again, you got to remember this book was written in the 1700s, I believe. Might have been the 1800s. It doesn't matter. Okay, so plunder, if we had a currency where nobody could steal it, right? Then isn't that a more honest, a more fair, a more free currency? And then, I always think, Bob, it's the vision of things, right? Again, we're 50 something years old. And I still believe that our future will be bigger than our past, right? And what's the vision? I mean, I know this would be just totally a guess, but if 20 years from now, 10 years from now, because I don't think it'll take 20 years, is Bitcoin is the whatever level of success or adoption that you want to say, you could say it's the only currency. Okay. And what's the future look like for that?
Yeah. You made a point earlier about the internet, and my, I was blessed to have been there, in the early days. And in fact, I was there pre-internet, because I one of the things I tell people is I arguably was part of the design team, a minor member, in full disclosure, of what I think many would say was the first laptop computer ever made. This was before networks even existed, or the internet. And, I rode that wave, and then into the internet. And I saw how things changed. And, I can say personally that about 92, 93, I could see the internet was coming. You could start to see what was going to happen. remember, Amazon doesn't exist. Google doesn't exist. None of these things exist. It's really just very crude text-based little websites, but you could start to see the power of this thing and the way people were using it to communicate. I ran across a stat just the other day. It was actually from a Fidelity report. And Fidelity, the Fidelity report showed that the level of adoption of the internet in 1997 is exactly the same as the level of adoption of Bitcoin today. Exactly the same. Same number of users worldwide using them. They followed a very similar adoption curve from birth to now, right? Bitcoin's actually running slightly faster than the internet in terms of adoption. So imagine how the internet changed from, let's say, 97 to 2010 to now.
Yeah.
I mean, it is in the space of 25 years, life is now unimaginable without the internet.
Right.
Businesses can't work. Phone companies can't work. Broadcast companies don't work. Banks don't work. It's completely transformed every industry, and it forms what I would call the base layer of everything. People may not know this, by the way. If you make a phone call today, even if you still have a business line or a home line, it's all runs on the internet. The old phone lines that you think of, those don't exist anymore. When you pick that line up, you're connecting to the internet, and that's what's happening. That's what's going to happen with Bitcoin. You may still transact in dollars, but 20 years from now, behind that transaction, behind MasterCard, behind Visa, behind PayPal, will be an internet transaction. It will go dollars to Bitcoin back to dollars. Okay. Bitcoin will be the base, what I call the base settlement layer of financial transactions around the world. It will be the rails upon which really all monetary transactions take place. There's a good chance that anything else that requires a high level of assurance and security will also transact on those same rails. That could be the movement of a home deed or a car title. It could be voting. It could be, a whole bunch of other things that will, what we call, settle on the Bitcoin blockchain. So, I have a great deal of certainty, Jim, that you and I will see that in our lifetimes. And I think what will happen is very much like what happened to the internet. The time period from 1997 to, let's say, 2002, 2003, that was the adoption period. We went from a single digit percentage of the world to somewhere around a third to a half of the world adopting over that 5-year period. There's this term whenever you study exponential growth, it's very hard to see the beginning of the exponential curve, but it's but then it just takes off at this astronomical rate, and I firmly believe that we're at the very beginning part of the liftoff phase of that, and it will change a lot. And what worries me for people that maybe get too heavy and too deep into a particular mode of thinking is they may get stuck. If store of value moves even 10% from the old system to the new system, that's essentially 10% store of value moving out of the old system, right? So I'm not predicting this. I'm just giving you a hypothetical, but you could see just from that movement alone over that period of time, you could see real estate prices and precious metal prices drop 10% just from that movement alone. And, combine that with continued debasement of the dollar, combine that with the Fed's quandary about interest rates and other things, and you have a real mess.
Yeah. Bob, this is such a big subject because, like, if we were talking about the internet and we could talk about it for days, right? Give people a couple things here. Give people like 3 kind of bullet points of something to think about when they're thinking about whether they should buy Bitcoin or when they should buy Bitcoin or anything. Just kind of 3 bullet points to help educate themselves, just kind of like you had talked about educating yourself over the last few years and becoming an expert. And we try to encourage everybody to read an hour a day, and there's statistics out there that say if you read an hour a day, within 7 years you become in the top echelon of humans. It's kind of interesting within 7 years, right? And that that's kind of amazing. But if I were going to read about Bitcoin, what are some of the things that I need to know? So those kind of 3 things. And then, so many people in the world today, as much as I'm encouraging them to read, they don't really read. They watch videos, they watch courses, and it's one of the reasons that we developed our community. And we're going to be kicking off our crypto group in the community, which Bob is going to moderate, and we'll have other people on there too, and guests and things. But your Q&A, and you can get a lot of questions answered in there. And we're going to kick that off. We'll probably just kick it off in conjunction with the release of this episode. And but there are, and we're going to put resources in there, and some, Bob's going to create courses on Bitcoin. And I mean, again, I'm sorry, I'm making my question really convoluted, but let's just go back to the 3 key points. How's that?
Yeah. Well, I think that's good. Like you said, I understand why you even kind of struggle with that, because you and I talk about this frequently. It's such a big topic. The ramifications are so huge that when we call it in the Bitcoin community going down into the rabbit hole. And, once you go into the rabbit hole, you never come out, because you realize that you're not talking about a stock. So I'm going to actually give you 4 things, Jim. I think I got 4.
Okay.
But the first one is, this is not a stock. It's not deciding if you want to buy Tesla or not. You need to make a decision as to whether or not you believe this or not. Take the time and make the decision, because choosing to not decide is a choice in and of itself. And I will say it's a very dangerous one, because what I'm talking about is a massive change in the structure of the world. And you may end up deciding you think I'm a lunatic and I'm nuts, and that's fine. But then you've made your conscious decision and you've bet on the current system. Okay. But you're not betting on a stock. And if that stock goes through the roof, it's not like you just lost that opportunity. You are choosing a side here. Okay. Now you can bet both sides. You can bet red and black, and that's okay. I probably would encourage you. I can't give it financial advice, as Jim said. Probably encourage you to do that. So that's one. Make a choice and do it from an educated standpoint, and realize that you can't listen to me talk for a half hour or watch a couple YouTube videos for an hour. This is something you have to learn about money. You have to learn about economics. And, if you don't put 100 hours into it, you probably haven't even done yourself justice. Okay. So it's probably like, through this year, find 100 hours, learn about Bitcoin. Second, think about what absolute scarcity means. Okay. A core principle of Bitcoin is there's only 21 million. And that's a hard number. It can't be changed. It is the exact opposite of everything else in the world, okay, which is ever expanding, right? Well, especially fiat currency is ever expanding, but even gold and silver, and even for real estate guys, I'll argue even real estate is not absolute. There's always ways of creating more land or more developed land. So it's good, by the way. I'm not here to hate on any of those things, but so learn about absolute scarcity. Number 3, much like the truckers in Canada right now, they're taking a stand. Okay. And they're taking a stand for freedom. Decide whether or not you want to place your bet on a system controlled by government. I believe there is a one-time chance in the history of mankind to be part of a monetary system that is not controlled by government, that can't be changed, that can't be corrupted. If this fails, then I would say for all human history, we will never have another chance to take it back. Either you want governments to manage money and all the things they're going to do with it, or you want a chance at least a parallel system they can't manage. And I guess the last thing is, this is a real challenge. It's a mental challenge. Is Bitcoin forces you, or at least provides the opportunity for you to think about wealth in a different way. So as Jim knows, when we invest in Bitcoin, we acquire Bitcoin, we use the terminologies a little different. We don't buy Bitcoin, we sell dollars. We're selling dollars to acquire Bitcoin. After we've acquired the Bitcoin, to a great degree, we don't care what the price is. Is it 40 today? Is it 50? Is it 60? Doesn't matter. Because what we own is, we own a percentage of the 21 million. And we are preparing for life on the other side of this, for this other financial system, right? And so we don't want to get enticed by some new run up in the Bitcoin price. We're not trying to move it back. We're not, that's not the goal. The goal is, hey, you start at least having a second way of measuring your wealth, and you do it in the new system. And when you move wealth over, you're not going to move it back. And that's a challenge. And I've been doing, as Jim said, I've been doing this for 5 years intently. I still struggle with it sometimes. It's like learning another language. My language of money is dollars. That's my native tongue, so to say, as it would be for all of us. But I'm learning a different one, and I'm close to fluent, but I'm not quite there yet. So those are four thought points for people.
Perfect. And Bob, like I said, we could probably talk about this forever, but we're going to wrap it up here in just a second. And, here's what I hope that this does for people is, like Bob just said, this is a starting point. If you don't know anything about Bitcoin, then this is a starting point. And there's a lot of books out there on Bitcoin. We'll put in the show notes some of Bob's favorite books, and that he would recommend that you try and look at. And again, I want you to understand, it's kind of like Nelson would probably have said about Bitcoin, is Nelson really didn't ever, it wasn't on his radar before he passed away about what really Bitcoin was. All right. And he maybe, I'm sure he knew the word and that there was Bitcoin. But when you think of sound money, you think of all that, this is sound money. This is the solution. And it's uncorruptible. So that's all you really need to know. So now, if that's the case, then I got to learn everything I can learn about it and how it's going to benefit me and how I'm going to use it or not use it. Or like you said, Bob, it's time to you're going to have to choose sides at some point in time. And I think that everything that is, people say, well, isn't the government going to shut it down? They can't. All right. And our government doesn't control these other governments as much as we think, because we don't have enough money to control them as much as we used to. Right. So that's only going to get worse. And there's somewhere I read, Bob, that the average currency only lasts like 30 years or something like that. And so our currency has lasted a lot longer than that, but our fiat money has not lasted a lot longer than that, right? And so
it's only
just
50
know
years old and it's showing signs of weakness.
it's wobbling. It needs an oil change. Needs something's happening. We're going downhill and we're wobbling. We're picking up speed as we get the speed wobbles. But I want you to think about that. We're going to put some resources in the show notes that are going to help you, some links that you can get some videos, and then look for more and more information in the community. And remember that community.createtailwind.com is your community. Okay. We're going to provide lots and lots and lots of information that's going to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's going to be all different levels of opportunity. And if you haven't joined, go to community.createtailwind.com and join, and start with the Becoming Your Own Banker book, because that's the course that's going to help you figure out what the problem is. And the solution is techniques like infinite banking and looking at alternative currencies, scarcity, all of that, what the government's doing. Educate yourself and then make your own opinion. So Bob, thank you so much for spending time and sharing all that great information.